Belisario, Professor of Media Innovation here at the Belisario College of Communications. On behalf of the Interim Dean, Denise Bortry, the faculty, the staff of the college, and our generous donors to the ComVentures Fund, I'd like to welcome you to our Creator in Journalism Summit event. This event grew out of a comment from my colleague, David Joachim, who noted last summer, okay, we were having a beer at the time, gee, this whole creator and news influencer thing, it's a thing. And I go, huh, you know, you're right. And he said, we should put something together for our students about this. And I said, huh, you know, you're right. 10 weeks later, here we are. David's keen eye, combined with more weeks of whirlwind work for Shannon Brace, has led to these discussions today. Throughout the day, we're going to explore the rise of individuals and organizations who are creating news content for distribution on all sorts of platforms, newsletters, their own websites, but particularly social media platforms, regardless of their affiliation with traditional news organizations. Whether you call them news influencers, creators, trusted messengers, these producers are having a major impact on the journalism landscape. We've gathered today nearly a dozen industry leaders and, more importantly, practitioners who can share their experiences, both as storytellers interested in informing the public and as business people seeking to make their products and projects financially sustainable. We know that all of you as students have a whole lot going on today, and you're going to be coming and going as your classes dictate. That is expected. We've tried to time these sessions to coincide with class times as much as possible. We ask only that if you must get up and leave to go to class, please do so as quietly as possible. And we remind you that many of our guests, those who don't have to immediately flee out of town to go to yet another event, many of these guests will be hanging around here for a networking reception down here in the basement of Willard at 4:30 this afternoon. I think you're going to see throughout the day that these are some of the smartest people doing interesting things out there. They are good people to get to know. So, for our first session, we're going to do sort of an overview, the state of creator journalism. We'd like to welcome two guests and a dear Belisario and Penn State alum who can sketch what's going on in the creator and entrepreneurial journalism worlds. First, the alum, my longtime friend and colleague, Krewson. Chris is the executive director of the local independent online news publishers association. Lion is a 600-plus member organization of digital-first local news organizations serving communities across the United States and Canada. During Chris's 6 years leading Lion, it's grown from just a few dozen members to the largest journalism support organization serving local news in the country. It provides training, community, commiseration, and financial support to its members, including more than $2 million in direct funding to those news sites through partnerships like the Google News Initiative and the MacArthur and Knight Foundations. Before Lion, Chris served as digital editor of the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Morning Call in Allentown, the launch editor of the legendary BillyPenn.org in Philadelphia, and digital leadership roles at Hollywood Reporter and Variety.com. This was after starting as a cops reporter at the Center Daily Times. Joining him is Liz Kelly Nelson, the founder of Project C, a support and community organization for journalism creators. She's developed and led training programs on this topic for the Online News Association, the Knight Center for Journalism in the Americas, and many others, and offers a popular 8-week training course for budding journalism entrepreneurs. Before she got interested in this topic, Liz was a senior executive at places like USA Today and Gannett, built out the podcast network at Vox, and did a Sulzberger Fellowship, where I believe this was germinated. So we're going to have a very casual conversation about what's going on in the space and why some of the most interesting things in storytelling and journalism are now happening in the world of creators, not just the world of traditional legacy organizations. Going to be plenty of time for questions, so let's get to it. Guys, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thanks, Tom. We talk about how interesting things are happening in the creator space, but hang some numbers on that. Chris, you've got a little bit of research that you've pulled together, right?
Well, I think, yeah, there's some slides up there that we can show quickly from something called the Reuters Digital News Report. How do I get to those slides, Tom?
I got him.
All right. This is the why behind the creator movement. Historically, when people thought about getting news and information, a lot of people got their information from television. Not much longer. Coronavirus, when we were all locked in our houses, most of us reached for our phones first and our TVs second. And the amount, these are national figures for nations, and the U.S. is kind of right in the middle of the pack, with most people going, before I went to school, I graduated in 98, right? Okay. I graduated in 98, so prehistoric times. Most of the people in my generation got their news first from television. That share has been steadily dropping over time, and you might ask, where are they going to instead? They do what you all do. They pick up their phones first. The primary source for most people, first thing in the morning when they wake up, they grab a smartphone. More in Brazil than the US, but not by much, and more here by a significant factor than the UK or other places. This is really hard to read, this chart, but I want you to pay attention to this. Younger groups are less likely to access news websites. They are more likely to be on social media networks, which means you're on TikTok before you're looking at a .com, any .com. My kids are your age. My son is a junior at Temple University. My daughter is 23. She's teaching elementary school in Louisiana. Both of them are far more likely, when they hear about something happening, to encounter that via TikTok, to search it on YouTube. They do not go to Google to look things up. It wouldn't enter their minds to do so. Talking to my son, I was reliably informed that there is an AI-driven account on Instagram that takes the voice of the fish in SpongeBob and says, "Breaking news," and then reads a headline about the Diddy sentence. I regret to inform you the talking fish has more than 1 million followers. This is the world that they're living in, that we are living in, and that is why, in a sense. I don't think I have any more slides. I think, oh yeah, look at that. Proportion that say the way they come across news is first thing in the morning, more than any other source, it's the smartphone. And in the US, it's more than anything else, UK and the US, right? This is just how the world works right now, and it should be no surprise because I see you putting your phones away right now. This is how the world gets this, so it should come as no surprise that is the primary driver for news and information for most people now. And this is a first, by the way. This tracks, people have been paying attention to social media and smartphones as a source for news for years, but this year was the tipping point that it crossed over beyond any other source. And by the way, more people this year watched YouTube on traditional televisions than on other screens or devices, which means the lines have completely blurred.
Yeah, so it's a great kind of segue to talk about a couple of things, one involving SpongeBob again, but we'll get there. I regret I didn't bring a slide, but there was a really important poll that was released last week from the Gallup organization. And Gallup, since 1974, has been tracking trust in mass media institutions. And when they started in 1974, that trust level was at 74%, which makes it really easy to remember. Last week, they released numbers saying that trust in the United States is at 28%, which is the first time it's ever dropped below 30%. And when you think about that, and also when you look at the breakdown by generations, the younger you get towards Gen Z and now even Gen Alpha, the more pronounced that distrust of major media institutions gets. And so that kind of riffs into my world and working with independent news creators, because there are also a ton of studies that show not only are younger audiences increasingly turning to social media for news and information about their world, they're turning to trusted voices versus brands, because there is a whole field of trust studies coming from the marketing world that tell us that it's not just trust in media institutions that is bottom out, it's trust in pretty much any institution, government, clothing brands, anything that you can think of. People are searching for a real connection and authenticity And I know that that sounds weird when we're talking about connection and authenticity being mediated by a social network, but often the things that pop for us, and I would include myself in this as well, in our social media feeds as we're scrolling through our connection with like a real human being, right? Like where we see somebody who's presenting something who we feel that we have some sort of resonance with, some kind of connection. So I have a friend named Ben Reininga who was a fellow at Harvard last year, a Neiman Fellow, and he did this big study while he was there for the year where he took as many research papers about news avoidance as he could find and fed them into a large language model for evaluation to find out like what were the top 5 reasons across a multiplicity of studies for why people were turning away from traditional news sources and avoiding news. And that was half of his study. And what he found were things like bias. It's depressing. It feels like it is elite. And it feels too complex. So it's like it makes me feel stupid when I read a New York Times article and there's an assumption that I'm starting with a base of knowledge that maybe I don't have. So I'm not going to read this. It's not for me. The other half of his study was he took the body of work that he could find on studies into the rise of creators and why they were connecting with audiences. And it was almost like a one-to-one comparison for why we are seeing trust in creators and individual personalities go up. Things like personality, casual, approachable, funny, talking to me like I am a human being, like all of these things. So if you think about a creator like V Spear, who, are you all familiar with V Spear? Does Under the Desk News. V is one of the top TikTok news creators, and V started years ago like with this shtick basically of like I'm doing my news literally from under a desk. So when you see V on camera, they are like under a desk with it behind them. It's kind of silly, but V is able to breach really complex, sometimes really hard stories and talk about them in a way that feels approachable and maybe easier than somebody who is sitting behind an anchor desk or talking to you in what we have learned often in J school about kind of like that kind of impartial voice of God. And the last thing I will say is that's the other thing about the rise of kind of creators as trusted messengers is that part of the loss of trust in mainstream media is like this belief that we have, and often like I think that we do like live up to this, and I count we in it because I worked in traditional media for 25 years, that we're impartial and that we are constantly seeking to not show bias. Study after study shows us that the audience does not believe that anymore, right? Like that there are editorial choices that are being made about the stories we're covering, the words we're using that show bias. Whereas creators, on the other hand, creator journalists, many of them are very transparent and open about where they stand on an issue. So even if you disagree with that creator, at least they're being honest with you. And that is breaking through people's walls and defenses and allowing them to build trust. So, yeah.
So Project C, which grew out of your Sulzberger work looking at the rise of the creator ecosystem and some of the economics behind it. In that work and in your work at Project C, what's the number? I mean, I know it's hard to say where the squishy line, where you draw it, but how many people are out there trying to talk about the news on these social platforms? How many of them do you consider to be serious enough that we could call them, air quotes, journalists?
Around the world? Millions.
Millions. How about in the United States, North America?
Hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands.
If not a million. So back in last January, February, Project C, we did something that we called the news ecosystem map that you can find at projectc.biz / I think it's ecosystem map, but you'll find it there. But anyway, it was an attempt to kind of categorize like news sources, like where are Americans specifically getting their news from? And the idea was to put this in context. Like where do creator journalists and news influencers kind of sit in this larger scale? So on the left side of it, and again, I'm now wishing I had brought slides. On the left side of it, you start with traditional for-profit media, mission-driven nonprofit media, and you kind of move across to new media, worker-owned collectives, which is another great thing that we're seeing pop up where people are like, I don't want to be a solopreneur, I want to do this with other people because like there's safety in numbers, that's great. And then creator model journalists, which is a term we use very specifically to describe people who are working journalistically and then news influencers, and then AI, which is a whole other, you need a conference on that too. But we very much delineate creator model journalists from news influencers. News influencers you could describe as the opinion section of the internet, and everybody has an opinion and is not shy to share it on the internet. So you will see a lot of people who are reaching significant audiences who don't have any background in journalism, and not that you have to have a background, a degree, or work, have worked in a newsroom to be doing this work and work journalistically, but we do like to define the people who we define as creator model journalists as people who are meeting some basic standards for what we all learn in J-School, what we all learn in newsrooms. That cohort is much smaller than the larger news influencer space. And that was part of what led me to want to found Project C and study this space, because I want to make sure that people, like, I have a 15-year-old son. Like, my son's not quite where Chris's kids are yet. And I see where he's getting his news from. His primary news source is YouTube. I want to make sure that I am doing whatever I can to make sure that students like you, that young people who want to be journalists, realize this is a really real path for you. You may never set foot in a newsroom, right? But I want to make sure that if you are going out there and putting your work into the social media sphere, that you're doing in a way where my 15-year-old son can see, this is what credible, rigorous work looks like. These people are talking about where they're sourcing their content from. They are being transparent about their advertising policies, or who might or might not have influence over their work. They're actually making corrections when it's pointed out that they're doing something wrong, so that ideally that will stand in contrast when he and others see that's not happening over here with Joe Rogan or whoever else is out there doing it. So to answer your question, there's so many, Tom, it's like a fire hose, but we are continuing to grow the group that are doing things in a responsible way.
Thank you. So thinking about that continuum Liz was talking about, we've got people who are acting as journalists following traditional standards, but doing it on their own on social platforms. Let's move a little bit back to the left there. Your members in Lion, this is an unfair question because there's no such thing as a typical member. What's a typical member of Lion look like? Where do they fit on that continuum, and how are they interacting with sort of this emerging world of creator platforms?
Yeah, there's a lot similar and a lot different among the constituencies, but there's overlap in the Venn diagram. The founder, so Lion's been around as an organization since 2012. INN, the Institute for Nonprofit News, was formed in 2009. This is right around the time of, I don't even think it's not even on those charts, right? It's before those charts started. But it is right around the time of the Great Recession, when it became a lot more clear that the bundle that represented the value of a daily newspaper was falling apart. And so these were early efforts to try to put something together that kind of walked and quacked like a newspaper did. A lot of the people that started these publications starting in 2009, 2010 were former newspaper employees, whether reporters or web, online editors at those places, that lost their job or took a buyout or some combination of that, went out there and used that money or a second mortgage on their house or their retirement fund to start something in their community that looked like a newspaper. Sometimes that started small and stayed small. Sometimes, like in the case of an investigative reporter in Vermont named Ann Galloway, it would grow to be the largest newspaper in that small state. That's a site now called VT Digger that is kind of renowned for the kind of work it is doing in that geographic area. VT Digger is a member of Lion. Big website statewide in California called Cal Matters. Big website statewide in Texas called the Texas Tribune. These are members of Lion. Other bigger organizations, and by big, I don't mean like large newspaper big, I mean like 35 or 40 people. That's big in my world. Block Club Chicago is a big newsroom that covers neighborhoods in the third largest city in the country. But most are smaller. Most are 1 to 2 person shops. There's a really neat network of websites in the Rust Belt in Ohio called Source Media, Richland Source, Mansfield Matters, et cetera. But they're the outliers. Most are a husband and wife team, sometimes where the husband sells the news and the wife husband does the news, wife sells the ads, or vice versa. Sometimes it's one person working in a college town, like Milwaukee Neighborhood News Service, right, where you have somebody sort of attached to the university. Now, they just merged into a larger nonprofit, and that's the other thing we're starting to see. In other words, these were all experiments. They're still experiments, trying to figure out if there is a world in which they can exist as a standalone business. But guys, it's hard because it's hard to build a business when there's not a lot of advertising. And right now they're running into audience troubles. They're writing investigations that depend on people to read them, and people aren't finding them. Is that because there's a big audience that hasn't figured out how to get to them? Or is that because they are not where the audience is? These are key questions that we're starting to figure out. The challenge for a long time, when I grew up, I went to school here. When I went to school here, it wasn't the Belisario College.
No, it was not.
We were much more humble in our origins. And we were told very clearly as students to not care about the business side. That was somebody else's job. You shouldn't be influenced by business. When these people launched their publications, they became publishers, they became business people. What we do at Lion is try to teach them how to be business people, what the business of news is today. Sometimes that's very, very hard. That is a big difference between a Lion member and a creator or an influencer who go because the audience and therefore the money is there. Quick detour story, my daughter that I talked about, who's in Louisiana, her fiance works at a brunch restaurant, so he's gone on the weekend. She got very bored, she got a dog. The dog is like a 4-pound Yorkie, very cute little dog. Dog has an Instagram page. Dog's Instagram page has 2 brand deals. 26 followers, but every time a piece of doggy clothing gets sold with my daughter's code, she gets $25. My members don't have brand deals. There's a market on Instagram around influencers, around creators that is generating significant revenue already. That is not the same. That is like, she just like did that as a whim. Talked about it with her fiance. They were like, we don't see a downside here. And now she's making money on merch. Like, it's crazy. This does not exist in the world that my members operate in. And it's because the audience is on Instagram, the audience is on TikTok, the audience is picking up their phones.
Well, yeah, and that's actually really interesting. So back in that era, like 2006, 2007, I was one of the first bloggers at the Washington Post. Many times I thought about, like, could I take this independent, right? Because I loved what I was doing. I had a huge audience, could have taken it with me. But back at that time, the creator economy did not exist. Like, so your option back at that time was to do what Chris is talking about, right? Go out and find a community of support like Lion. Many went the nonprofit route, right? Because that was the way that you could actually get funding. Or your option was, like Ezra Klein, to go and find a media company to found a Vox.com and, kind of do it in a more traditional way. Fast forward to 2020, which is, we did a list, Tom, over the summer of the top 50 creator model journalists working in the US. And we did a lot of data crunching around those people and, kind of their characteristics. And 94% of them had launched 2020 or after. And they're all the same people that Chris is talking about, people who either lost their jobs because there have been so many layoffs in traditional newsrooms, or just thought, like, I have a misalignment with the, kind of the executive team or like kind of the editorial direction of what I'm doing, or like, I'm not making enough. I see these other people over here who have a YouTube channel who are like getting brand deals like, that Yorkie and making some really good money. Another former Washington Post colleague, Chris Saliza, who writes a newsletter on Substack called So What, was also, he and I launched our blogs the same week at the Washington Post. He's now on Substack. He's making $225,000 a year just from reader revenue, so people paying for subscriptions to his newsletter. Now, again, he's like in the top tier of people who are doing this. That is not everybody. It's not everybody who I work with, but you're going to be hearing from some people today who are doing this, folks like Matt Brown over here and Dustin, who both have very successful newsletters. And just would love for you to consider what I'm talking about, what Chris is talking about, what all of us are talking about. Like, you have many options as you contemplate starting off on your journalism careers.
20-some years ago, when you're sitting in that chair, you're trying to get a job at a local monopoly. If you're trying to get a job at your local newspaper, that local newspaper might be called the Post-Gazette, to take an example that's nearby. Once upon a time in Pittsburgh, there was a Post, there was a Gazette, there was a Tribune, and there was a Review. Now there are 2 newspapers where there used to be 4, and one of those newspapers, the Post-Gazette, was so fabulously profitable that it could spin off hold up a newsroom of hundreds, have constant need for employees, and they were doing that with 10 cents of every dollar they brought in. 90 cents paid for the rest of the newspaper, 10 cents paid for the newsroom, and that was so much money overall that they could employ hundreds of people in a not small city. That math is gone because that monopoly is gone, and where that monopoly went, where those advertising dollars went. Do you guys know who takes most of the ad dollars on the internet? Which two companies take most of the ad dollars on the internet? Alphabet and Meta.
Google and Facebook.
Google and Facebook, right? Google mostly through search, although an increasing number through YouTube. Meta through Instagram, Facebook. They own WhatsApp, but they don't really advertise on WhatsApp, I don't think. But WhatsApp is also kind of like plumbing for the world for telecommunications. Leaving that aside, there's a huge market on mostly YouTube and Google and somewhat on Facebook. More on Facebook than any other place put together, right? Amazon's advertising business is now larger than the newspaper industry as a whole. Just ads that run on Amazon and Amazon Prime. Netflix has ads now. Like this is where the attention went. That is where the dollars went. They went to there. Where did they leave? They left newspapers. So it would follow that you follow the money for not just news, but for jobs in this space as well. The money is in those places because the audiences are in those places, and now we're seeing jobs and careers pop up around those places.
So let's flip that around and focus on those jobs and careers. Once upon a time, like within the lifetimes of everybody in this room, we would graduate seniors, they would go out if they had a couple internships, they'd get an entry-level reporting job for anywhere between low side $35,000, high side $50,000 a year at some newspaper, or working the god-awful overnight shift at some television station in Market 145. What does a typical Lion member generate in revenue, and what does that translate, whether it's that 30-person Vermont digger hiring reporters or whether that's husband and wife team?
So it's interesting.
You know, we talk about sustainability. Can they make money?
It's hard. So Liz touched on this for a minute, but do you guys understand the difference between like a nonprofit and a for-profit, what that means for how money comes in? So in Lions Network, we have about 55% of our members are for-profits. They are LLCs, but they are not profitable as a whole. They are small. Median revenue of a for-profit Lion member last year was, want to say, about $145,000, which for a 2 or 3 person organization is like okay. It's not great. Nobody's getting rich. For the nonprofits, it's a little bit more. I want to say 225, but they tend to have staff between 4 and 10 people, so that's still not a lot of money. Your path to, I teach at Temple, I teach entrepreneurial journalism, and the way that a for-profit Lion member makes money is by selling ads, is by going to the town dry cleaner and pizza place and funeral home and selling ads on their local news website. And the way that a nonprofit typically brings in money is by, a few large grants from local foundations, and then tries to get rich people in town to donate to them, either a lot of small amounts or a few big amounts. And we're still not talking about a ton of money. And that is getting harder because the pool of dollars for nonprofits is now being crowded with places that had their federal dollars cut. And so every university with a development team that is aggressive about calling alumni is all of a sudden competing in the same places that my members are competing for dollars with foundations and grants and other things. And so it is a competitive space.
Liz, same question. So some of these independent creators, there's no such thing as atypical, but what's the range of money that those people can generate? Put another way, are these side hustles, or are some of these people like actually carving out jobs for themselves?
Hell yeah. We see people at all points of the spectrum. So we run a community called the Project C community, which is a Slack community. We have 133, I think now, working creator journalists, all people who kind of hit our mark for working journalistically, who are all building. And they are at all different ranges along the spectrum. We have some people who are pre-launch, right? Some people who have, like, they're still working in their newspaper job or their, digital news site job, and they're just kind of figuring out what they're going to do and how they're going to get there. We have people who are just in the early stages, and some who, like Matt Brown, who you'll hear from later, who has been doing this for quite a while. A couple of examples that I'll give, one of which is Matt. Matt launched, when did you launch, Matt? 2020, as a solo, right, great time, as a solopreneur.
Well, you had a captive
right?
audience.
Right, yeah,
I mean,
solopreneur, working by yourself. You now have how many employees? Right. So Matt has moved from being kind of what we would call, kind of somebody who wants a sustainable lifestyle to being an actual enterprise, right?
A small business.
A small business, right? And on his way, other examples of that, like one is Barry Weiss, right? Like, who now is the head of CBS News. She launched a Substack, which then became a massive, I would say, digital media company. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, I would say, is people like, we've got a guy named Brian Vance who launched a newsletter in Portland, Oregon called Stumptown Savings. Brian was laid off by, I think, CityCast, and launched this because he had an interest in grocery prices. It was something he cared about, right? Like, how am I going to pay for the food that I have each week when I really need to watch my money? And he was like, I'm going to start writing about this because I'm a journalist and I approach this question with curiosity. And it has become a massive hit. It's really growing in terms of audience, but he's really struggling,
right.
to find those local advertisers.
And Brian picked a topic that was inherently commercial and approached it as a journalist first, had enough sense that there was an audience there, but is uneven in his application of the business, right? Like, Brian instigated a talk, and we have Lion's big on this idea of news entrepreneurship, right? The idea is, if local news is a small business, and local news is a good small business, more people will start local news businesses, and we can encourage the phenomenon of, we'll start a flywheel of people who want to do this because it's a good business. Challenge is, it's not such a great business. It's not an easy business. Brian is doing something, he's all alone in his town. He is by far the smallest person. He's the only person in Portland writing about groceries, right? That's not a high bar, right? So in some ways, there's no competition, but in the other sense, how do you monetize a source for information about the price of eggs or the price of orange juice or the price of milk? That is his challenge. And so when he just kind of, I don't want to put Brian on the spot, but I will say there is a certain strain of founder of these sites who just thinks what they're doing is so important they should get money for it. And the world doesn't work that way. It turns out you have to work for money.
There's a learning curve.
And you have to work for it. And you can't just get audience and say, I have audience, give me money. You have to prove your value to the people giving you money. It's harder when you're going for advertising because you're fighting against people. You're fighting against Google and Facebook. They're your competition. And on Google, if nobody clicks on your ad, you don't have to pay Google. Once somebody clicks on your ad, then they charge you a very, very small amount. Why? Why is it such a better value proposition for Google? Because the thing that ad runs next to is your search or a video that someone uploads. There's no cost to that person, to Google, for creating the thing the ad runs against. The same logic is true on Facebook. Where do you see ads on Facebook and Instagram? Next to pictures. Does Facebook pay for those pictures? No, we put them there. They are our pictures. So the cost for Facebook is just the system. The content, when you're news, we're in the content business. Brian is trying to support himself, and his cost of creating things is inherently higher than those platforms. He has to build an audience. They have the audience. That's where that's why it's so hard. It's an uphill battle.
I mean, well, I would draw a quick contrast. So there's another local newsletter called Catskills Club, which is run by a guy named Michael Kaufman up in New York, who is just killing it. And where he's killing it is with local advertisers, right? Like, he has been able to go kind of door knock local businesses, people like, orthodontists and podiatrists and wine sellers, and get them to actually fund his newsletter, and he's actually doing quite well. So part of the challenge is a lot of people go into, especially journalists, into the content creation business thinking, this is great, I just get to do this write all day or make videos about something I care about, when really the mindset shift is you are a founder, you are a business owner, and if you are doing for-profit work, you need to spend as much time becoming excellent at that as you are at being a journalist.
And we have found that is the challenge.
Let me cut you guys off here and start a conversation. What questions do you guys have from the room? Do not be shy.
Please ask questions. We're very nice. Did you plant her in the audience?
I did not, but we love a friendly question. So Lion, what do journalism still? Can I ask a question of my audience and how many of you expect to walk out of college and get a job at a traditional news organization or traditional advertising agency or something? How many of you, that's the plan, leave and get a full-time job somewhere? Raise your hands. How many of you want to do it yourself, want to be a creator, want to go get on that Instagram and start getting an audience for yourself? Or TikTok or whatever it is.
How many of you,
at the first
maybe one.
and maybe one or two.
wait,
on the
how many
second.
of you already have like digital social channels where you're posting content in that
Besides
way?
homework.
Yeah, besides like your clothes. I see
One
a
or
couple of
two?
tentative hands.
Yeah.
Okay. To your point, I can't make someone want to be an entrepreneur. I can't make someone want to create their own job. And a lot of times the entrepreneurs in Lion are almost accidental entrepreneurs, right? Like they sort of stumbled butt first into this and now we're trying to make a go of it. We don't presume to tell them how to do journalism. We assume they've got that covered. What we know they need help with is the business side stuff. The way we have done that over the 6.5 years I've been there started with small programs that only helped a few of them at a time, but helped us learn a lot more about those. Labs, accelerators, 6 months to 2 years. And we tried to figure out how much help they needed, how much bandwidth they had to receive that help from us, like how much time in their day they had for a coaching session. Did they need a coach? Did they need a consultant? Did they need a therapist? and do they need, they all tell us they need money, and I'm not arguing the fact that they need money, but we also know that if we just give them money and then that's it, they'll spend the money and then they'll be back where they were 6 months later with, you know, in some cases worse off because they maybe hired somebody and now they can't pay them either.
Give a person to fish, teach a person to fish.
So it's about the metaphor of trying to teach members to fish. The way we have found most effective in doing that was developing a tool, and we talk about sustainability, which is the lowest bar of existence for a business. Will you be around next year? Did the thing you create, does it have enough value that you can pass it on to somebody else at your organization, or in the case of many family businesses, your kids, right? And not a lot of people are meeting that bar right now because they are, they ready, fire, aim their idea at a community, they launch it, and then they try to figure out how to monetize it. We have advice about how to do that, for like how to launch more effectively. Some people take it, most people don't. Most people find us after they've launched, and we try to help them make better decisions, more carefully use their limited resources to have a bigger impact so they can figure out what to stop doing and do more of to earn more revenue, to start doing more things, right? Build, test, and iterate. But this is not like business thinking. This is as much product thinking, which is a different way of talking about resources and like those are the things that we try to help them with.
Shameless plug, 361 in the spring, journalism entrepreneurship, and 493, both spring and fall broader media entrepreneurship. Liz, go.
Yeah, so it is interesting that like more people put their hand up saying that they wanted a traditional media job, and I think that's actually great. Like I think it's a really important thing to start out with a community, with an intellectual community where you're learning at the, you know, in community with other people who are doing this work, from people who have been doing it with editors. Like there really is like, there are lessons that I learned working at the Washington Post, working at the Palm Springs Desert Sun, working at USA Today with this guy that, you know, really have like served me well as I've gone out and, you know, become independent. However, as you've heard from both of us, like whichever path you choose, it is a very unsteady one. Media companies and news organizations are really embattled right now in terms of the business model. So there is no guarantee that that newsroom job that you get will be there a year from now, just like there's no guarantee that like an independent entrepreneurial venture will survive a year from now. So what I would encourage you all to do is to actually launch something, to actually start building your independent brand and an audience around what you can do, right? Like what your brand, what your reporting is, because that will serve you well whichever path you choose. And in fact, I would go so far as to say that many news organizations are now looking for reporters, producers, other folks who are coming into the organization who are bringing audiences and those skills with them. I will tell you in the next year, I am certain you are going to see more and more jobs posted for social media first reporters at traditional news organizations, because I'm getting many calls from news organizations saying, help us write a job description for this. So start building that brand now.
And even if you don't use Google, your employers will to find out about you. So it makes sense to own what winds up on the other side of that Google search now. You want them to find pictures of you at the Cafe 210, or you want them to find pictures of you looking professional, doing professional things? Like, it's an easy choice.
I'm not sure Cafe 210 still exists.
Doesn't it?
There are modern.
I thought it did.
There are. Okay,
Does it?
okay.
Yeah,
All
right.
right. It's not where my
It's like the
students are
only
trained.
You old
only
man.
thing I remember from. No, I'm kidding.
One more question from the audience, from a student. Come on, wake up.
Weird
Yes.
questions welcome. I have a great example
I
for
know,
you.
right? This is like big fat softball over
do you
the
know
plate.
who Dave Jorgensen is? Okay, so Dave Jorgensen was actually the person who built the model that Carmela is working in. He was called the Washington Post TikTok guy. He launched back in 2020. Massive audience. Like, you really should look him up. He's very fun. Dave, by hook or by crook and through like a few negotiations with the Post, actually ended up leaving the Washington Post over the summer. He has launched something called Local News International, which is now an independent YouTube channel, TikTok channel, Instagram channel, and newsletter, where he has taken his audience with him. He is monetizing. I saw him speak at O&A this year, and he's also a member of the Project C community. But yeah, I mean, he, like what I was advising you to do, and Carmela, have built up audiences. They've just done it within newsrooms. I would predict that within the next year, I wouldn't be surprised to see Carmela walking away with her audience too, and it will be a cakewalk. It will be easy.
What's great about this example, I'm so glad you brought it up. Dave, when he was at the Post, had more viewers on the TikTok, or the YouTube videos rather, that he made than any other Washington Post video on the YouTube channels, right? When Dave left, he took his two bosses with him.
Yes.
Yeah.
They left to form the company together because they knew it would be easier to get audience and eventually revenue to support their small team that they wanted to grow. And it's funny because the Washington Post itself has a history of doing this, incubating businesses that then grow off and become worth. I mean, Washington Post.
Hello,
Who owns the
Ezra
Washington
Klein.
Post? Jeff Bezos, right? Spent $250 million to buy the Washington Post. The first business the Washington Post spun off was Politico, which sold to Axel Springer a few years ago for $1 billion, or 4 Washington Posts.
Yeah. And the Washington Post got none of that money.
The second business that one of those founders of Politico built, called Axios, sold to Cox with a valuation of $386 million, so more than the Post. So we're already talking about 5 or 6 Washington Posts worth of value out of basically one dude.
Well, yeah,
Right?
I mean, and also
So-
Ezra wanted to have
Vox,
Wonk Blog
right.
basically become Vox within the Washington Post. A short-sighted amount of vision on the executive team's part led to him going and getting investment from Vox Media, and the rest is history there.
I just in the interest of time, we're going to transition now to our next conversation. Please join me in thanking Liz and Chris. Both will, you've got to
Yeah, I'm around.
mingle, talk. Let's bring our next
Yeah,
panel
and I have
in.
stickers. Come find me if you want a Project C sticker.
Stickers, because, I see stickers on laptops. Julie, please join me. Have you seen Audrey? No. Okay. We'll get our next panel in as these guys transition out.